very important feature of colonial policy making was exclusion, because the policies were made by including very limited number of people in a very limited way. For example, local noblemen, officials, influentials, landlords, or capitalists were included or consulted during policy making in a very limited way. But a lot of people were actually excluded from the colonial policy making and policy implementation process. Perhaps this is the reason that the extractive part of colonial policy making was highly successful, while other public policies were not that successful in delivering on their promise. If we look at the exclusions in policies in British India, you will have some features which are very important. For example, Indian history was downplayed, and Indian institutions were slowly sidelined by the British administration. Local knowledge was not utilized in policy making. For example, local health practices and local agricultural practices were downplayed by the British administration. Even local educational practices were also downplayed at many a times by the colonial administrators. And the local traditions, cultural practices were slowly subordinated to the emerging bureaucratic setup in India. Uh, it was impossible to imagine that ordinary people participate in policy making and implementation. What to talk about ordinary people? Even the state functionaries like doctors, like teachers, headmasters, and traders, they were not represented in policy making and its implementation. European precepts of democracy and equality were not part of the policy discourses. They were just used in the United Kingdom, but not in India. Very different definitions of democracy and equality were actually used in India. Um, and Indians generally had very little control on changing policies which did not favor them. So the whole policy regime in British India excluded people in uh, in a great way, and since it excluded people in a great way, the public policy making was an exercise from above. It was imposed on people from above, and it was most of the time imposed in a coercive way, because of course people were not generally consulted on the main features of public policy and the styles of its implementation. Uh, these practices were continued in some ways in post-colonial Pakistan, that public policy making was generally done from above and implemented on people by the impersonal administration.